friends, and welcome. This is the Happy Warrior Podcast, fresh takes on the most important and little-known stories of the day, hosted by the Happy Warrior Substacks and everyone's favorite conservatarian journo and disabled otaku, Pete Pishke.
Hello and welcome everyone to the Happy Warrior Podcast. Today I'm proud to have film critic Christian Toto with us to talk about his new book, Virtue Bombs. Welcome, Christian. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, so let's just hop into it. So you've been a film critic. You're one of my favorites, one of the few cultural commentariats members. What is the book about? What inspired you to write it?
I had a conversation with a book publisher, I guess a year or so ago, and about some other topic. And he said, we should do a book together. And I thought, well, that's very cool and flattering. And I've never written a book, though. And what would I write about? And I always thought you need to have a real specific theme and topic and a real hunger and a real passion for any kind of book. You know, doesn't matter what the topic is, but without that, you've got nothing. And then I thought, all I do day in and day out is write about, complain about, report on woke culture. So that's what the book is. And you could say, well, you know, it's just an actor or actress being silly or virtue signaling, or, you know, someone apologizing for doing the wrong thing on social media. But this is really a bigger issue. Obviously, it extends far beyond Hollywood. But what happens in Hollywood doesn't often stay in Hollywood. And if, you know, the biggest stars in the world, if they can't stand up to the woke mob, then what chance do you have, or I have, or anyone else have?
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. If it takes out the biggest whale, us little fish have no chance. So when did you, because you've been a cultural writer for a long time, when did you start noticing a shift in the climate towards these issues that you're concerned about, especially the wokeness in film and TV?
You know, I mean, I think Hollywood is a liberal industry. That's been the way it is for quite some time now. This is kind of a branch of it. There's certainly overlap, but I would say maybe 2015 or 16, this issue started to creep in. The Ghostbusters reboot from 2016 was a real culture war moment. And I think that really intensified things quite a bit, where you had an all-female troupe of players who were replacing an all-male group of Ghostbusters. And while you could agree with that, disagree with that, have no opinion on that, the culture took it seriously and said, you know, you can't critique the project based on that, because then you're a misogynist. And, you know, this was a message that was reinforced not just within the studio, Sony, but also, you know, the Washington Post had stories that echoed those themes. So I think that's when it really kind of caught fire, and it's only gotten more intense since then.
Definitely. It's remarkable on how few years things seems to change. Hollywood used to be the place where almost everything was permissible. I mean, even the stuff you'd be like, oh, that's in terrible taste. Why'd you allow that? And now these days, they're among the most prudish among us, which is just it's a whiplash of a change in such a short time.
Yeah, I think the culture in many arenas is just moving so rapidly from the technology that we didn't know we needed yesterday, but have to have today. Things like that. You know, I used to love the radio. I mean, it was my dream to have my own radio show. Now I don't listen that often. I have maybe a few select shows, but it's all podcasting. And I used to love having the newspaper in my hand. Within like a blip of an eye, that doesn't interest me at all. So I think we're all moving so quickly. You know, I want to mention, you kind of just touched on this a little bit. When it comes to comedy, and comedy is a huge focus of both the book and what I report on. If you see a guy or a gal and she falls in the pool, or she gets a bucket of water dumped on her head, or there's a pie in the face, those are not nice things. That's like if your friend had that happen to them, you'd be, oh, I'm so sorry. But sometimes we laugh at dark moments. We laugh at those situations. And sometimes I laugh at jokes that are inappropriate, or that I don't agree with politically or ideologically speaking. Sometimes it's okay to laugh at darker impulses. It's kind of part of what humor is. And I think to deny that is silly. And I think a lot of the reasons why we don't see a lot of great comedies these days is because they've stripped that element away, and we're not allowed to laugh at people behaving badly sometimes. And, you know, when movies like Animal House get excoriated because, well, John Belushi's character was gawking at girls in the sorority house. Well, so what? he's not my son. He's not my uncle. I don't approve of that act. He's being outrageous, and we can laugh at those things. Everyone on that set was, agreeing to that moment. There's nothing bad about that. But that's kind of beyond the pale now. You can't do those jokes.
No, definitely. You point this out in the book, and I was like, I haven't actually seen a really great comedy in a long time now. Everyone was going crazy for that. I don't think it's very good, but the movie that just came out on Netflix about the asteroid landing.
Don't Look Up, yeah.
Yeah, Don't Look Up. And everyone was like, it's so amazing. It's so funny. It's just like Doctor Strangelove. And I watched it. I was like, I think we have different definitions of what is a comedy here.
Yeah. I thought that started strong and went nowhere quickly, but I don't remember laughing that much, if at all. Maybe a couple smiles or chuckles, but
no, exactly. And you write in the book, sometimes it's more about the clapter. What does watching this show really say about you? Does it that stuff always just rankles me. I hate that kind of thing. But that's why your book is titled Virtue Bombs, because it goes into a lot of the impulses that are feeding this. Let's talk about some of the other aspects going on right now. What about the influence from other things that have affected us to where we are? Is there a role somehow in what's happened in China and the pressure to censor movies? Has that played into what's happening now culturally in Hollywood and elsewhere?
I think it's part of it. I think it's part of the fact that the actors refuse to speak up for censorship, refuse to speak in favor of free speech. Maybe they were trained by being quiet about the China Hollywood connection, that they should keep their mouths shut about certain issues and yet pipe up about almost every other issue. I'm here to technically plug my book, but I just read a book called Red Carpet. It's about the China Hollywood connection. Mm-hmm. It's brilliant. It's so beautifully researched. It's powerful. And it really breaks down what's going on from a cultural perspective between these two nations. And, so if you don't buy my book, go get that one, Red Carpet. It's spectacular. But yeah, that is part of the issue here. It's part of listen, if all the celebrities were soulless and they just went for money and they did what they wanted to do, I'm kind of okay with that. They would be sort of true to their own selves, but they spend half the time sort of, preaching at us, the other half the time being hypocrites. So it's a bad look.
Well, I point to China because we have the Olympics going on, but also in China, there's many great art. The Quillet ran a great article from a psychologist a few years ago about how if you live in China and you want to be an active member of the community, you kind of need to know how to keep two thoughts in your head at the same time. He's like, this is my public thought. This is my actual thought. Yeah. And I kind of see that now. We see it, of course, all the time in the journalism world, but I kind of seeing that in the culture coverage world. You reached out in your books to people you knew in Hollywood, artists, writers, directors. Some of them are on the record, some aren't. When you were reaching out, what were you mostly hearing from people? Did you ever hear back from someone that says, I agree with you on XXY, but I don't dare take a chance to speak on this?
I think I hear that in general. So that's not a foreign thing that I hear. It comes up all the time, honestly. I talk to people and we'll have like a podcast conversation before the conversation even starts. He'll share some stories with me and say, well, I can't really talk about this, in public in a forum of some sort. So that's happening all the time. It's, I mentioned early in the book that what's happening now in Hollywood is about fear. And I go into that in some detail, but it's fear. People are afraid to speak up. They're afraid to say what they really think. They're afraid to share their emotions. They know that there are certain thoughts that are approved and there are certain thoughts that are not approved. And the fact that is our existence is very China-like. It's not as demanding as China. It's not as fear-based as China, but that's where we're going, is that this sort of like, I can't share my opinion. And listen, if your opinion is black people are evil, then yeah, I think I'm okay with you not sharing that opinion. That's pretty awful. And that's toxic and terrible. But what if you had other opinions that weren't toxic and awful? They just were opinions and they were based on fact and they were based on things that many people believe. What's wrong with that? We need to have these open dialogues and discussions. And that's often missing. It's just, it's scary to hear. And I don't see any improvement coming. I don't see any significant progress either. I finished the book a while ago and I thought, well, if things are on the upswing and things are getting better, I'll be happy. I wouldn't sell any books, but that'll be, that's a good compromise, that I sell no books, but we're having some improvements in our culture. But that's not the case at all. It's getting worse in many ways. And when they try to take down a Joe Rogan, it's not just Joe Rogan. It's not just one podcast. That's a message that reverberates across the landscape, saying if they can take down the biggest podcaster in the country, you're next.
No, exactly. In some ways, it's more worrisome to me than China in the sense that there isn't like a giant government censor that's coming down that's forcing us to do this. We're using our own agency to come to this place. That's just a tad scary for someone like me. And
it's self-censorship too. It's saying, okay, I know this could get me in trouble, so I can't tell that joke. I know this narrative could get me in trouble, so I won't write that script. Self-censorship is terrible. And by the way, I think we're seeing the government creep into this. The Biden administration is sort of suggested that Joe Rogan watch himself. There's Jimmy Carr is a comedian. He just told kind of a crude Holocaust joke, and they're a government body saying that this should be outlawed. These are scary times we're living in. And again, you think it's just a joke, just a comedian? It never stops there. It's like what happened in universities the last few years with the woke takeover and the tackling free speech. It doesn't stay on campuses. It bleeds into the culture.
So you're on the side of the argument because there are people that are kind of heterodox. They're saying that maybe we're near the end of the woke clash. But what I hear from you is that you're more towards that we're kind of at the beginning of this. Unfortunately, I lean towards your direction. I think you're more right than the other side. I honestly don't know how long this thing is going to go on for.
I don't know either. I don't know where we are in the spectrum. I kind of hope we're nearing the end. I think people are starting to get fed up. But there are lots of different cultural forces in play here. It's not woke, but when big tech says you can only have certain opinions and you can only propagate certain stories in the news, that's an issue. These are all interconnected, though. This is not isolated. It's not like there's just woke here and big tech suppression there. They're all part of the same thing. It's suppression. It's suppression of ideas, of debate, of dialogue. And whether it's a screenwriter who can't write the story he or she wants, or it's the New York Post can't sharing a well-researched story about Hunter Biden. It's all part of the same continuum, and I don't see progress. I kind of think of myself as a fairly optimistic person. I'm not a doom and gloom guy, but I'm not seeing the praise. And we have little minor victories. Oh, Dave Chappelle, survived the cancel culture attack. Well, that's great. It's important, but look what happened to Joe Rogan right now. He's backpedaling. He's apologizing. He's getting attacked left and right. That's not good.
I do want to get here in the interview about your work as a film critic, a little bit what that's like, especially on the conservative side. But you go into your book about talking about Joe Rogan. I have this question I openly have, especially when it comes to Disney and Star Wars. So you write about the cancellation of Gina Carano. For those who live under a rock, Gina Carano is one of the big stars on the hit show The Mandalorian Disney Plus. She shared some. They were just so inoffensive. It's ridiculous. Memes about the Holocaust that were like if the people of Germany could be pushed along to believe this terrible thing, we should watch over the same thing. This thing you always heard. I've been growing up in the 90s and 2000s. Everyone said that kind of thing.
Yeah,
it was all over the place. So what happened there with Gina Carano, and why is it that we can't get Gina Carano back? Because it seems like there's a lot of people that want her back, and even Disney can't seem to make this magic trick happen.
Well, Disney doesn't want to make it happen. That's they have no desire to get Gina back. A quick aside: I met Gina a few months ago on a movie set. She couldn't be any sweeter, more delightful, more open, more honest. I was very impressed by her. She was very cool, but she had views that were not in the narrative, the accepted narrative, and that's why she had to be punished. Even if you disliked her comments about the Holocaust, she wasn't using it as like a bullying tactic. She wasn't being mean and aggressive. She was actually calling for empathy. That was the main message behind it. Again, I'm not a big fan of any kind of Nazi analogies. It's such a awful chapter in history. I don't like to go there. That's just my choice. So I wouldn't have done that specifically like she did. But so what? We've had 4+ years of people calling Republicans Nazis because they supported President Trump. And, we've seen Saturday Night Live do that. We've seen Conan O'Brien do that. That was mean. And listen, it's satire. I'm not calling for those to be banned either. But what they did was far more aggressive and unpleasant than what Gina did. And but Gina lost her job. Gina lost her job from Disney, which is playing footsie with China, which is committing human rights abuses across the board. It's all absurd. But we live in a media landscape where these stories don't get out there to the mainstream. And I would think a liberal friend of mine would read the Gina Carano story and say, "Oh my gosh, that was terrible. That's not right." Well, I would love feminists to kind of rise up and say, "You know what? We don't agree with her on every issue, maybe even on no issues, but she's a woman. She stood her ground. She said her mind. It wasn't evil or vicious. She should have her job back." But that didn't happen either.
So why is it that companies will not listen? Because you bring up in the book about Gina that even at the Disney investor calls, people will go up to people like formerly Bob Iger, now Bob Chapek, but like, "Why did you fire this person? Why didn't you have her on?" I mean, obviously they're aware that she was a very popular character for The Mandalorian. So why is it that Disney doesn't want you say? If you were someone at Disney, is it just too high of a risk even if you were willing to go there?
People right now collectively fear the hard left. They fear the woke mob. They fear them more than other people. So even if you have a popular character on a TV show, and even if you thought, well, bringing her back might give me a ratings boost, might be we might sell more digital copies of The Mandalorian, they are more afraid of that mob and more afraid of angering that side of the aisle that they wouldn't do it. I mean, that's just that simple. We've seen cancellations and pop culture changes stemming from a single tweet, an op-ed. The Gone with the Wind was briefly taken down from HBO Max after a single op-ed from a LA Times, a columnist. One column took the most popular movie of all time. I think if you adjust for inflation, it's the biggest blockbuster ever. That numbers back then versus now. It took it off the platform. So the people just fear that movement right now. They have all the power. If you or I complain about something and we gathered, 1,000 of our friends and had a very specific complaint about a very specific issue, we would be brushed aside. But if a few people on the left are angry about something and threatening to rattle some social media cages, then things may get done. It's just the way it is right now.
Okay, so talk about the world that you work on, film commentary, cultural critic. That's an interesting space to work in. There aren't a ton of people who are on the right-wing side of the aisle, especially people who are self-identify as conservatives that work in that. Let's talk about a tad bit about that, and then what are the positives you think you're seeing in the world of cultural commentary for people who are more of our political or ideological persuasion, maybe some of the more negatives? For one, how did you get into becoming a film critic? What was your journey into that?
Real quickly, I was an art major. I wanted to be a Marvel Comics illustrator, but was never good enough. At the end of my college career, I decided I would love to write movie reviews. And so I thought, well, let me become a reporter, and then maybe I can kind of segue into becoming a critic. I mean, it wasn't very well thought out, but it did work out eventually. So I went to 2 different newspapers, basically elbowed my way into the entertainment staff. And then once I left the Washington Times, my second paper, I was a full-fledged critic, left there to move to Denver, and then decided, well, I am right of center. I am a film critic. There are very, very, very few people doing criticism like I do. So let me just kind of break out on my own. And that was kind of it. So again, there are so few people doing what I do. And I will say with the caveat, I feel like there's been a rise of people on YouTube who are very successful, far more than me, who are doing something similar. There's The Quartering, there's Nerd Erotic. And some of these shows aren't even aggressively conservative. They're just sort of bucking the narrative, and God bless them. So, so I think, technology has given a ramp for people like me to do what I do and to survive. But there aren't that many people doing what I do. That just is what it is. Most film critics, the vast majority, are left of center. Many are hard left of center, and they often let it show in their reporting.
Is that an area, do you think, that there would be more room? I know Sonny Bunch, I've talked to him about this, and he's talked about that sometimes it's difficult to make inroads to have room for cultural commentary from the right side of the aisle. And he's someone that definitely has made a lot of hard decisions trying to grow that area. Do you think if you were someone that wanted to get into film criticism or you wanted to talk about these issues, do you think there's room for that, or would you have any advice for someone like that?
There's always room for it. I think it depends on how strong your voice is and how good you are as a critic and as a writer or a podcaster or YouTuber. I think there's always room for more talent and more voices. Advice, be distinct, be honest, be blunt. Just try to find. When I say your voice, it isn't just your speaking voice, but just your sort of the way you carry yourself in your reviews. Your persona, your brand. And I'd also say, especially if you're going to be on the right side of the aisle, be professional, be mature. I think you may get more fame more quickly if you're angrier and more red meat and more aggressive and less fact-based. But I think that's a dangerous path because I think you could rise and fall fairly quickly. I'm sort of, it's not the path I've taken. But I also think people like me might come under more scrutiny than the average critic. So, tread carefully. And, what I've been able to do is to kind of be right of center, be openly so, but also, get all the screeners that I need to get to be part of critics groups, to interview actors. And that's what I want to be. I don't want to be some guy who hates an actor because he or she is liberal or something. That seems ridiculous. I don't want to be the critic who hates a liberal movie. If it's good, I'll say it's good.
All right. That's an excellent attitude. I agree with that. So now that the book is out, have you got any feedback from people you didn't expect? What are you hearing from the response of this? Was there stuff that you wanted to cover or you feel like you wished you did cover that didn't get into the book?
On the last point, after I guess you'd call it putting the book to bed, there were other stories that broke up. I mean, just the Chappelle story from late last year, I couldn't include in there. But, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter which stories are included or excluded because there's always going to be something new and provocative. But it's the sort of the sense I'm kind of building here, the arguments, the landscape. That's what matters. So, I could, if there was a second edition, I could squeeze the Joe Rogan saga into it or things like that. But it's not really necessary. There's a really definite pattern here. There's a culture that's going on. And I critique it aggressively. And I, at the end of the day, I love movies. I mean, I got into this business because I love to review movies. I used to watch movies with my dad. Like that. This is really important stuff to me personally. My wife is she helps nonprofits and she helps people with healthcare, and it's wonderful, noble work. And it's far more important than what I do. But this is my passion. This is my industry. This is what I care about. So I think just by doing this, I'm trying to affect change. I want more voices. I'm not trying to stifle folks on the left. I want people on the left and the right to tell stories, and may the best stories win. So I don't know if that answers your question directly, but I may have lost.
Yeah, that parts of it. I definitely agree. I think that the difference between people who are on the right versus the left, for the most part, for these conversations, is people on the right want there to be more people, period, allowed in the conversation, whereas in people on the left, not all of them, but many of them, they want it all very tightly controlled.
I'm amazed that lately what I do on Twitter and social media and some of the writing I do, I'm trumpeting Joe Rogan, who's not a conservative, Russell Brand, who as of a few years ago was a flaming socialist, Matt Taibbi, who's a very left of center journalist, and Glenn Greenwald. And why am I championing all those voices? Because they're about freedom of expression. They're fighting for free speech. They're not against free speech. They're smashing narratives. They're questioning things. These are super important themes. And, if you're on the right, you can't just say, well, they don't align with my worldview perfectly. They have to go away. We need everyone on this side. And until we kind of win this culture war battle, where we can say what we want to say and think the way we want to think, it's all hands on deck. And just from a personal point of view, this was never what my persona was. I was never this combative about the work I do. I just wanted to review movies back in the day, but I look at the landscape and I can't stay silent. And this is where the culture has led me, and I want to speak out. And this, like I said, my wife does work and it's good work. I think this is good work to an extent too. I think this matters. It's important. And this is what I can do. I can't fundraise. I have no money. I'm not skilled. I'm not a politician. I can't, knock on doors. It's not what I do. I wouldn't be persuasive, but this is how I contribute. This is my choice.
I think it's important. This, as you point out in your book, and you've said many times, Andrew Breitbart, his dictum about culture being, politics being downstream of culture was exactly right. Mm-hmm. I am glad that there seems to be more push in the cultural sphere. So let's talk about, so yeah, most of this has been deeply negative and skeptical. Let's talk about the positives. You work with the Daily Wire. They are active players in trying to not only comment on the culture, but change it by producing films and other products. What are some of the positives you're saying? What's it like working with the folks at Daily Wire, and what should people see that should give them hope that, you know, things won't always be so dark and gloomy?
Yeah, you know, my book ends on a more positive note, and I'm glad you mentioned that as well, because I think it's important. The doom and gloom can make you feel hopeless. You know, I'm a contributor to the Daily Wire, so I'm a freelancer there. I've had nothing but positive connections and reactions and support from that organization. But even if I didn't work for them, even if I didn't get a nickel from them, I would be cheering what they're doing just by saving Gina Carano's career. Not maybe saving is too strong a word, but coming to her rescue or supporting her at a time where no one was going to support her, and giving her a job and giving her own movie and letting her produce it. That's amazing. You know, making original films like Shut In and Run, Hide, Fight and the upcoming Terror on the Prairie. These are good things. And, you know, I'm just buoyed, if that's the right word and or way to say it, about comedians like Ryan Long and JP Sears and Tyler Fisher and Chrissy Mayer. You know, they're just blazing their own trail. They're saying the things they want to say. They're working around Hollywood. They don't care. They're not going to be on Saturday Night Live. I wouldn't want to be on Saturday Night Live. It's terrible now. That show is a disaster. They do jokes their way, on their terms. They're succeeding. They're thriving. Those are good things. There's an absolute hunger out there for that kind of content. And you know, the fact that Gutfeld, the show, is successful, well, duh. You got every late night show is hard left. And you said, maybe we should put a right of center show in there. Gee, that's a no-brainer. But why did Hollywood not do that? Why did it take Fox News to do that? It's kind of it speaks volumes.
I think you're right. I think what is on the side of those who love culture and freedom is that there's more of them than there is of the others. I think the reason why they're going after Joe Rogan so hard, obviously, is because he's the biggest media platform right now. Period. And he stands for those old cultural attitudes about freedom of expression. And they just cannot have someone that's saying that's so big and popular as he is. But I think you're right. That means, though, that there's a huge audience for this thing. And I don't think that's going to change, at least not in the near future. So I agree. There is hope. Well, thank you so much, Christian, for coming on, talking about your book. It was a good read. Refreshed some of the stuff I already knew. I learned some stuff I didn't, which is always nice. You are welcome to come back anytime. Is there anything else you want to end us here on?
Yeah, just a reminder that, we have power. We have collective power. We can support projects that we agree with. We could, choose not to support projects we don't agree with. And I think that we don't use that power enough. And, if there is a typical, whether it's right of center or maybe just sort of groupthink, destroying content out there, a crowdfunding campaign, a TV show, a novel, support it, buy it, use Patreon to help artists out who are just beginning their creative journey. And maybe they're afraid of being unsuccessful and not paying the bills. We can do little things on our own to make this, to chase away the woke ideology. We really can. We just have to kind of use our power. It's there.
All righty. Well, I agree, and I think people will. Well, thank you so much, Christian. It was really cool having you on. I appreciate it. I've been a longtime reader of your film criticism, so thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Happy Warrior Podcast. Intro and outro narrated by Nicole Carino. Music by O-Wires. If you like what you hear today, please go to thehappywarrior.substack.com and subscribe. Be sure to follow us at HappyWarriorP on Twitter. Email is happywarriorp@protonmail.com.